Hello everyone, welcome to another video of Python playlist. Now in this video we are going to talk about how to access various elements from the list and various ways to do so. Positive and negative indexing, what do we exactly mean by list slicing and splicing techniques? How could we provide range to a list using negative indexes? And what is the step parameter that is used for skipping different indexes? Now, if you haven't watched my previous video, then I do recommend you guys to watch that because it is a continuation from the previous video where I have explained you basics about lists. Now, as we discussed earlier about accessing elements from the list, to access any element in O of one time complexity, we need to be aware of index of the element. So, without delaying any further, let's hop on to the first question, that is, what is positive indexing? Now, if you have watched my previous video, you must be aware of ways to access elements from the list using index values. Now, to jog your memory up, I will give you a glance of it. That is, to access the first element of the list, we are going to use index 0. For accessing the second element, we are using index 1. For accessing the nth element, we are using index values n-1. So, index value always starts from 0. Now, in this example, suppose we want to access the value 5 in here, which is present at the 5th position. So, we could do it by accessing index 4 in here. Let's try to save it and run this. Yeah. There we go. The result is as expected. Suppose you want to access the value 10 in here. So, it is present in 10th position. So, you have to access it using value 9. So, one thing you will notice every time whenever we are giving an index, it is always a positive index. That is, it falls from 0 to positive integral part. So, that's why we call it as positive indexing. So now moving on to the second concept, that is, what is negative indexing? Now just a minute ago we talked about positive indexing. So from the previous explanation of positive indexing, it is very obvious that negative indexing makes use of negative integers as its indexes. Now you might be thinking, are negative index even valid? So of course it is a valid statement, but it is very specific to Python. So if you are on any other programming language, you might want to check whether it gives you support of using negative indexes. Now let's take this example of L1 and L2 to demonstrate what negative indexing is. Now suppose I want to access the second last element from the list L1. So how do you think your approach would be? First of all, you will calculate the length of L1 and you will subtract it by 3. Now why 3? Because you remember positive indexing starts from index 0. So you always need to have one lower element than what the position is. So you have to do length of list L1 minus 3 to access the second element. Now what if I give you a simplest solution where you can skip all the calculation and you could directly access the value without doing any subtraction and all? Yeah. So negative indexing makes us possible to access elements from the last. Now negative indexing means it starts from the end of the list. That is, the first element could be considered, first element from the last could be considered as index -1, second element as -2, third is -3. Now remember why I am saying -1 not 0, because index values are unique to each element that is present. So let's try to access the second last element. So you could access it using -2 and there we go. Suppose you want to access 10th element from the last. So you simply have to pass -10 in here and you will be able to access the 10th element. Now on the screen you could see an illustration where I have given a particular list and the above part indicates the positive indexing, whereas the below part indicates the negative indexing. Now you could access any of the elements using any of the way you want. You want to use positive indexing, feel free to use that. Negative indexing, you go for it, because the time complexity for accessing an element is no different. It is O of 1 for both the cases. So you could use it as you are familiar with or whatever you feel easier. So these are the two ways how you could use indexing. So talking about the next concept, that is slicing. So the very basic question that should be popping onto your mind right now is, what is slicing? Now slicing is a method of extracting specific data from the list. The data are usually contiguous, but exception like step counters also exist. Now let's take an example for better understanding. Now in this case we are taking example of L1 here. Suppose we want to extract data from 5th index until 10th index. So how could we do that? Now one of the way that you must be thinking is, we could write it manually. That is, we could assign a list that is L here and we could write L1 of 5, L1 of 6, L1 of 7, and that goes on, right? But what if you are asked to extract hundreds of data in a specific pattern, or you want to extract 100 contiguous data that is present from the list? How could you do that? do you think it is feasible to type all index values inside a list manually? No, that's not a proper method. So what is another method? Another method is you could use loops for that. Now I haven't taught you about loops, so you don't have to worry if you are not aware of this. I will be covering that in the next video. Now, what is the problem with the loops? Now, in case of loops, you might have to use additional variables to keep track of the counters and incrementing and doing all the operations, which could be easily done with the method that is provided by Python already. Now, for this exact slicing method, Python has given us a very specific way of giving start index, end index, and the step counter, so that we could complete the same piece of task in a single line of code without using any extra resources or the variables. Now, first of all, I will write the syntax, and second, I will explain you how the syntax or how exactly slicing works. Now, as you can see on the screen, this is the very basic syntax that we are going to use to perform slicing operation. Now, here we are providing the parent list from where we want to slice the data or extract data from. Now, we are providing the start index in here. Suppose as I explained earlier, we want to get the data from 5th index until 10th index. So, we are providing 5 in here because we want our data from 5th index. What is end index? As we know about start index, end index is basically at what point do we want our slicing to end. Now, there is a note in here, there is a hidden statement in here. When you're talking about end index, it will always consider the index value that is lesser than the index you have provided, one lesser than the index, because start index is inclusive in this particular slicing technique, but end index is not. So if you want to extract data from 6th or 5th index to 10th index, then you have to provide end index as 11 in here, because and then only it will calculate up to 10th index. Now, what is step counter? By default, step counter is 1 in this case because we don't want to skip any specific element. But suppose you want your data present in a very specific pattern. Suppose you want to get data on a counter of 2. You want to first get 6, then you want to get 8, then you want to get 12, 10, then 12, and that series goes on. So how could you do that? You don't have to delete anything from the list. You just have to pass a step counter variable, that is you want it on a counter of 2. And it will perform what you need. Suppose you want it on counter of 3, you could perform 3 in here. Suppose you want it on counter of 5 star 2 or anything that user wants to give in times of 2. So you can give n star 2 in here. So this is basically a way to provide pattern so that you could extract data without doing any additional method, just by following the pattern. Now I have a question for you guys. When I said index step counter is 1 in here, what do you think happens when step counter is 0? Have you ever wondered, like, what is the reason why step counter can't be 0? It is starting from work. Please, I would love to hear your thoughts. So let me know in the comment section, and I will surely reply if that is the correct answer or not. And I will pin out in the comment section what is the correct answer for this particular question I'm giving you. So let's take this example of extracting data from 5th index to 10th index. Now I will try to print, that is L1, because that is the parent list. Now, as I given the question earlier, that is from 5th index until 10th index. So what do you think will happen when I'm doing this? Let's try to run this out. Yeah. So it is getting data from 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th and 9th index. As I said, it won't include 10th index because this is exclusive, the index value that is provided at the end. Suppose you want to get until 10th index, then you have to provide 11 in here, that is n plus 1, and there you go, you are getting this data. Suppose you don't have to provide any parameter for step counter because by default it is taking 1 as value. So suppose you want to provide 2 in here, and I am increasing this to, suppose I am saying 17 in here because we want to see a wider range of examples. So here we are getting 6, 10, 12, 14 and 16, because what it is doing is it is 5th index. From 5th it is going to skipping 2, that is 7th index, 9th index, 11th index, 13th index and 15th index, right? So we have given until 17. So since it is exclusive 17, it won't consider 16 as well, because based on the step counter from the starting value, it will end up in index value, that is 15, right? So this is one way of doing so. Suppose I want to increase it to 3 for the step counter, and let's try to run this. Yeah, there we go. The number of elements decreased because on that particular interval we are specifying, that is from 5 to 17, it is calculating index, that is 5, then 8, then 11, then 14, and that's it. It won't consider 17 because 17 is the end index. So I hope you had a very clear understanding of how to use this method. Just a moment back, we were discussing about slicing. What is the syntax of slicing, where to use that, how to extract data from the parent list, what is start index, end index, and step counter, and how to use all those things. And we understood with the help of an example. Now we are going to talk about splicing. Even though pronunciation is same, it is completely different word. Now what exactly is splicing? Splicing is basically inserting a sequence of item in list, possibly replacing a slice. Now whatever data that we are extracting using the method slicing can be called as a slice. Suppose we were extracting the data from 5 to 17. Now we could call list from index 5 to 17 of L1 could be considered as a slice of L1. So we are trying to replace a particular slice with some value or a sequence of data. So that's the process we call as splicing. Now I would want you guys to pay attention here. If you are searching for the term splicing, there won't be available in Python because Python doesn't use the term splicing at all, since there is no splice method. So whenever you are going to search for splicing, you might find in the Python documentation that it is referring to it as assigning to a list. So that is what is the alternative word for splicing. Now let's hop on to an example in here. So we are doing L1 of 5 to 17 and we are trying to replace it with the word called bold coding. So what do you think is going to happen when I'm printing L1 in here? Is it going to replace only the 5th index? Is it going to replace the 17th index? It is going to replace everything as bold coding, or is it going to replace every element that is present between 5 and 17 with bold coding? What do you think is going to happen? So yeah, so this is what's happening. It is basically deleting everything. I mean replacing everything that is present in index 5 until 16. Now if you remember, using slice we are not considering the end index, that is exclusive. So that's the reason why we are considering from 5th index until 16th index, and we are replacing everything that's present with the word called bold coding. So what if we try to add another thing, that is hello world? So what is going to happen now? Let's test it out. Yeah, so it is going to replace it with bold coding and hello world. So basically you could add any number of parameters or any number of values in the list and you could replace it with a single slice, multiple slice, any way you want to. So that is how we are going to use splicing. Now that we have completed splicing and slicing concepts, I will give you guys some short tricks using which you could extract data, you could copy a list to another list, you could get data in a specific pattern. Now, if you remember from the previous slicing concept, this is basically the syntax where we were passing list, start index, end index, and step counter. So what happens if we miss out the start index and give only end index? Or what if we give start and step counter, we leave the end index? Or what if we give both of this as empty and give only step counter? So there are a multiple number of scenarios that is possible in here, which is permutation combination of whatever I said right now. So I will give you guys a few examples which are most commonly used in codes and which are basically easier way to understand or extract data from the code. So based on that, you guys will have a very clear understanding about different combinations. So let's get started with that. So what do we mean when we are printing L1 of this? Now we aren't giving any start index or stop index in here. So what do you think is going to happen? Let's try to run it. Yeah, there we go. What it is doing is it is basically printing everything. If you are not mentioning any start index or end index, it will iterate throughout the loop and print everything that is present inside here. Let's hop on to the second example. Let's start it with 4 and let's do this much. So what is going to happen in here? Yeah, it is going to start from the 4th index and it will move until the end because we haven't mentioned any end parameter. Let's move on to another one. What if we give here 4 and what if we don't give end index, and what if we give it here 2? What is going to happen in this case? It is basically going to print from 4th index until end with the iteration of 2. Like there will be a step counter of 2 which will be skipping 2 elements at once. And this is okay. Now what if we try to give only step counter rather than giving anything else. So what is going to happen in this case? Here the expected behavior is it will print from start index until end index, and it will have a step counter of 3. So these are a few scenarios that is possible in here. Now you guys could try a combination of any of this and let me know in the comment section if you expected some behavior and something else is coming up, and I will explain it to you guys in a very clear manner. Now that we have understood the concept of slicing fully and experimented with few values, now let's try to put negative index and perform slicing operation. What do you guys think? Is it going to work or not? Because until now we have tested it by putting positive values, we have tried with 0, we have even left it empty. What do you think is going to happen when we are putting negative values? So to test that scenario out, let me comment this things because it is making the terminal too crowded. So let's try to print here from L1. Suppose I am giving a random thing that is -6 until where? We want it until -1. So what do you think is going to happen in here? Is it going to work? Yeah, there we go. It is working. As you remember from my previous explanation, slicing always performs its operation from leftmost index to rightmost index unless and until we specify a very specific counter to move backwards. Now I have a question for you guys. If I ask you guys to reverse this whole list L1, so how do you think is it going to happen? Now most of you guys must have already thought, yeah, this is too easy, and they must have already thought this as a solution, that is -1 until 0th index, right? So are you guys thinking the same thing which I have written in here? So sorry to disappoint you, but this is not the full solution. If you try to run it, you are going to get an empty list in here. Now why is this happening? Because whenever it is at -1, it is trying to check if 0 exists after this point of time. And as this is the last element, there is no more element present, so it will just return an empty list. So how could we do that? We could just pass the step counter with value -1. So what it is going to do, it is going to do a -1 in here. It is going to extract the data from the last index. Then it is doing -1 plus -1, that is -2. So it is moving on to -2 index, that is the second last index. It is printing that value, then going to this, and it iterates until 0th position. Now 0 is included in here or not? Let me know in the comment section. I have discussed it a lot of times till now. Yeah, there we go. The 0th index is not included. So there are other ways to perform the reverse operation where 0th way can be included, or here we could, instead of 0, we could give a negative length of L1 plus 1. Now how could I do that? Let me write it in a short form. To find length of the whole list, we are doing len of L1, and we are giving a -1 in here. Why -1? Because as we are iterating in using negative index, we can't give a positive index in here. If we are giving a positive index until len, then it is not going to work, because -1 is same as length of the whole list. So it is going to return you an empty list. Now test it out and let me know whether my statement backs up or not. Okay, let's try to run this. Yeah, there we go. Now it is printing all the elements that is present in the reverse direction. Now you guys could keep experimenting on splicing techniques and let me know if there are any other ways you could work with, or any extra things you came to learn other than what I have taught you in this video. So that's all for this video, guys. If you have any kind of suggestion, doubt, or any queries, feel free to reach out to me through my LinkedIn handle or provide your doubt in the comment section, and I will surely reply it to you guys as soon as possible. Thank you guys. See you in the next video.